TikTok's independent security inspector says protected U.S. user data is not in any way being shared with China, and the platform is performing exactly as TikTok has been saying it does for years. That's according to a new report released today from Haystack ID. And this report is probably going to be very important when TikTok is negotiating with the Trump administration to prevent TikTok from disappearing in the United States in just 36 days. Now, before I tell you more about this new report and explain why it's so interesting, you need to understand the TikTok corporate structure. So I've been reporting for years about the U.S. government's concerns about TikTok and the national security threat that Congress says it poses because of its parent company, which is based in China. I want you to think back, if you can, to 2023. You remember those intense congressional hearings starring TikTok CEO Shou Chew, where Democrat and Republican lawmakers were unanimously yelling at him, saying TikTok was a danger to the 170 million American users because China could access all this American data and could spew Chinese propaganda into the United States. You remember that. Well, during that hearing, you may have missed it because of all the yelling, but TikTok's CEO brought up the fact that the year before, in 2022, TikTok had created a brand new, separate American company to secure protected U.S. user data and firewall it from any type of access by China or anyone else. Now, I've reported on this other company before. That American subsidiary of TikTok is called U.S. Data Security, or USDS. U.S. Data Security is obviously based in the U.S. It is self-contained and it is separate from TikTok. It works with another American company, Oracle, which is TikTok's cloud partner. Oracle servers house every single piece of American user data here on American soil. And as of January of 2023, USDS was fully operational, and only USDS personnel who are not even employees of TikTok have access to TikTok's Oracle cloud infrastructure. Now, here's where Haystack ID comes into play. To prove to the U.S. government that TikTok is going above and beyond to protect U.S. user data and China has no access to that data, not only did TikTok stand up this completely separate company, USDS, but they did something no other social media company does. They gave third-party independent security inspectors access to TikTok's full source code, algorithm, mobile app code, and backend services. Those third-party independent security inspectors are basically white hat hackers, and they constantly go through TikTok's code and infrastructure looking for vulnerabilities. And they make sure that TikTok is actually doing what they say they're doing. Haystack ID is one of those independent security inspectors. And that leads me back to this new report released today from Haystack ID about what they found at TikTok. They said they were hired by USDS back in May of 2024, and since July of last year, they have been testing TikTok's systems and infrastructure. And in September of last year, they started going through the millions of lines of TikTok source code to conduct security tests. While a representative from Haystack ID told me that they have found sort of run-of-the-mill vulnerabilities that any social media company may have, which Haystack ID says TikTok addressed immediately with patches, Haystack ID confirmed that they have not observed any indication of internal or external malicious activity. Based on Haystack ID's independent evaluation, the TikTok platform is operating as intended, and at this point in testing, Haystack ID has identified no sharing of protected U.S. user data with China. Now, you're probably thinking what I'm thinking. Well, of course they're going to say that because TikTok's paying them. Well, I asked the representative from Haystack ID that very question, and he told me that TikTok is not Haystack ID's only client. They have worked for years with lots of other high-profile companies that are actually under mandatory national security agreements with the federal government. It's Haystack ID's job to be third-party inspectors to make sure those companies are complying with what the federal government wants and all the things they agree to in those security agreements. And if those companies aren't complying, it's Haystack ID's job to let the federal government know and make sure those companies come into compliance. The U.S. government trusts Haystack ID to call balls and strikes and be transparent. So it's really not in Haystack ID's best interest to break that trust by just randomly making things up about TikTok, because then Haystack ID may miss out on lots of other contracts. Does that make sense? Now, the only difference in this TikTok case is that TikTok doesn't actually have a national security agreement in place with the United States government. As I've reported many times on this page, they tried to get one done, and they were this close to getting one done, But during the Biden administration, the federal regulators ghosted them. And then, bam, Congress passed the law to ban TikTok in the United States. So basically, TikTok fully implemented a national security agreement and are in full compliance with that agreement, according to Haystack ID. That's not even required by the US government. They're just doing it because they said they would. Now, just because Haystack ID hasn't found any vulnerabilities where US user data could be accessed yet, the representative from Haystack ID told me that that doesn't mean they won't. He said Haystack ID is going to continue to inspect every single line of TikTok source code and going to continue to work with USDS to confirm that TikTok is upholding all of the data security promises that they've made. But to this point, they say they haven't found anything. Now, lastly, if you've made it this far, I'm going to share some big news with you. I already let my paid Facts HQ subscribers know a few weeks ago it was happening, but now I can tell you too. Next week, I'm going to be sharing a big exclusive story with you. It's something that no one has ever seen before, and you will only see it on my page. No other media outlet in the country, including the big legacy media, has this information. You're going to see inside USDS, and you're going to hear from the guy who runs it. So stay tuned for that very interesting story.